Good morning, students. Welcome to all of you in this lecture number 19 of module 3, that is process of education. So in the last chapter, we discussed the dimension of education along with its contents, goals, significance. This chapter is basically dedicated to process of education. So in this session, we are going to discuss a process of education, how a child understands reality and what is the role of system and teacher to facilitate in the direction. So let's see what is the process of understanding in a child. So basically in this class, in this session, the main point of discussions are number one, what will be the method of human education? What will be the process? And number two, some other important points for the teacher to keep in mind while imparting the education. So these 2 points we are going to discuss in this session. So let's start. One thing is very important to be noted, that a child always willing to understand, learn, do everything. So child wants to understand, wants to learn what is right, what is not right. Everything he or she wants to know. This knowing is innate in a child. Another thing is, the child can understand. It means child has enough potential to understand this existence, this relationship, coexistence, and he or she make lot of efforts on his own to understand each and everything around him. So if you observe a child, you can notice it very clearly that with the help of their parents, child learns about 5,000 words. And not only words, the child also learns their pronunciation, mannerism, etc. So when the child is willing to learn and the teacher is willing to teach, then the process of teaching and understanding becomes very simple and natural. And for this, there should be feeling of guidance towards the child, and child should have the feeling of gratitude towards the teacher, a feeling of glory for the teacher. Then teaching and understanding happen naturally. So child has innate desire to understand, innate faculty to know everything. If we teach them with the feeling of affection, with the feeling of guidance, then it becomes very easy for a child to understand the whole process. So education can only be imparted with the feeling of relationship. So we can also understand the sources of education. So what are the sources of education? Mother, father, elders, family members, teachers, teaching institutes, society, order, various medias, etc. All these are the sources of education for a child. And with this environment, child wants to learn, child wants to know everything. And we can help the child with the feeling of affection, with the feeling of guidance. So let's see what actually is required in student and teacher for a successful teaching. What is required so that a child can receive the things as it is. So number one, If we see from the perspective of student, we can see feeling of trust, feeling of respect, feeling of affection, reverence, glory, gratitude for the teacher is required. So if the child is able to feel gratitude, if the child is able to see reverence, and child starts with the feeling of trust, respect, affection, then it becomes very easy to receive the things. And if we see from the context of teacher, so feeling of trust, respect, affection with care and guidance is required for the student. So if the teacher has feeling of guidance, feeling of care, and student has feeling of glory, gratitude, reverence along with trust, respect, affection, then teaching process, the process of understanding becomes very natural. Now there is no hindrance between teacher and student. A student is asking with the feeling of trust, with the feeling of respect, asking every doubt, whatever he or she has in mind, in the expectation that teacher will help me to resolve with the feeling of guidance. So if there are these feelings in student and teacher, then process of understanding becomes very easy, very natural. So though we have studied all this about all this feeling in previous lectures when we talked about various relationships, and at that time we saw the prominent feeling required in relations, and one of those relations were teacher and student. Similarly, a student should be inspired by the teacher, by the conduct of the teacher, and in teacher having excellence, making effort for excellence. So when a teacher makes effort for excellence, when a teacher has excellency, then a student becomes inspired by the teacher. And once he or she becomes inspired, it becomes very natural for him to receive every word from the teacher. Similarly, making effort for excellence. Once a student observe, once a student see the feeling of excellence for the teacher, he also start making effort to become like a teacher. So with the feeling of excellence, child and teacher, student and teacher becomes co-explorer. And once both become co-explorer, it becomes very easy. The process becomes very smooth, very natural, and understanding in both happens naturally. So teaching cannot be done by the way of domination, fear, punishment. Teaching can be done with the feeling of affection, with the feeling of trust, with the feeling of respect. So in teacher, there is a feeling of guidance, feeling of care, and in student, there should be feeling of glory, gratitude, reverence for the teacher. So if these feelings are at the base, then we can facilitate a child to understand everything what he wants to know. So let's see this process of understanding, this process of education. So as I told you that a child intrinsically has a desire to understand about right. He wants to do right. He wants to understand the truth. He wants to live by the truth. He wants to live in a mutually fulfilling manner with human being and rest of nature. Or we can say a child has a innate desire to understand harmony and to live in harmony. He wants to live with justice. All this is innate in a child. In fact, every human being has potentials to see this reality, to know the reality. So what is required is only drawing his attention to the reality. This is the guidance that is expected of each child. So in any case, child is making effort to know by himself, and we can be helpful in that process. So if we observe a child life, you can easily see that child goes through these various stages: imitate, follow, obedience, arbitrariness, opposition, revolt, struggle, etc. So I will explain these various states briefly. So if you observe a child starts by observing, by imitating, by copying the action of parents. So child starts imitating, copying the parents, action of parents, behavior of parents, words of parents, and he or she wants to know about everything. In fact, he asks lots of questions. He wants to relate to people around him. He picks up the language, the accent, the mannerism of their surrounding. He wants to do things. He tries to participate in everything the people around are doing. So some thoughts and actions lead to her or his happiness. This is satisfying for him or her. So if thoughts and action that lead to contradiction, thus makes unhappiness. If it is satisfying, then it makes him happiness. So by time a child, when he or she is going to school, she learned the language spoken at the home, and she learned a language with accent by just imitating their parents. So at very early stage, he or she does this imitating, and by imitating he is able to learn the whole language, and not only language with accent of their parents. So if two languages spoken at home, then child easily grasp the two language with accent only by imitating their parents. So in this manner, he or she able to recognize approximately 5,000 things. If you ask a child about the things around you, the child would be able to tell you about 5,000 things. The child can identify their shape, their size, color, property, cartoon character, etc., etc. Body parts, feeling in the self. Many things he can tell you, and all these things the child has learned through imitation. So in this process, the child starts with imitating, and then after imitation, after a few years, he starts following. It means with imitation, he starts applying his mind also. And if he or she follows you as it is, you say that the child is obedience, disciplined. When he goes to school, many things are told to the child, like respect the parents, be peaceful, don't indulge in fight, etc., etc. Many values are told in the school. But when a child do not find those values in parents, then the child feel contradiction in himself or herself. So suppose when a teacher tells a child, be peaceful, don't fight each other, and if in the house parents are fighting with each other. So what do you think? The child will feel comfortable within himself or uncomfortable? So definitely uncomfortable, because it is not according to his or her natural acceptance. So once the child feels uncomfortable, he starts arbitrariness, because the child is not able to tell you that you are, as a parent, you are living wrongly. And sometimes he listen you, sometimes he doesn't listen you. And he come in stage of arbitrariness. So sometimes he listen to his friend, sometimes he listen to his school teacher, sometimes he listen you, and his life becomes arbitrary. And when you observe this arbitrariness, you start dominating the child. And domination is not naturally acceptable to anyone. So the more you dominate the child, the more feeling of uncomfortability arises in the child. So more you dominate, more he feels uncomfortable. And when he feels uncomfortable, many times he feel opposition. And many times the child expresses his opposition, and many times he is not able to express it. So with this, he reaches to revolt. And thus, this revolt becomes struggle at one stage of the life, and similarly, it ends up to the war. So these are stages at various state. For example, while child going to a school, he start imitating, following along with you. Then at a family, he start this obedience, discipline, arbitrariness. At the college level, he feels more opposition due to politics, due to not able to live in relationships. And many times he becomes involved in revolt in situation like war between parent and child, between friends, etc. And what is more important is this happens generation by generation. So if a child who has grown up with this stage, when he would become parents, his child will follow the same route. So generation by generation, there will be a degradation in civilization. There will be degradation in generations. So during this self-verification, if the child finds the inputs are not right, not leading to harmony, then the child starts to have doubt about elders, teachers. If the knowing still does not take place, the child conduct remains indefinite. The people around the child then try to restrain the child with more instruction, more domination. And whenever you dominate, whenever you put the things in the form of do's and don'ts, many times he feels opposition, revolt. All this you can observe at your home. So age may vary, but the stages you can observe with your child. Okay. So if he or she is not able to get the necessary guidance, not able to get satisfactory answer, he remains confused, and his living becomes based on assumption. An assumption may be right, assumption may be wrong. That's why his life becomes very arbitrary. His conduct becomes indefinite. Then what is the way to come out of this indefiniteness, this arbitrariness? So what is the way? The way is when a child in a state, when he starts going to school, there is a need to do such education which can help the child to verify the things on his or her own basis. So at this time, at school time, we can give such kind of education which help the child to explore himself, which help the child to find out the innateness, to find out the natural acceptance. Once the child is able to find out his natural acceptance with exploration, he may decide by own rights what is right, what is wrong. And once the child starts deciding the things on his own basis, on the basis of natural acceptance, then he becomes self-disciplined gradually, self-confidence. And once this child becomes self-disciplined, self-confidence, then its next generation will imitate the same process, and the next generation will become self-disciplined, will be self-confident. In this manner, generation by generation, the child improves. So you have to observe, you think, are you able to give this process of exploration to the child? Are you able to give right proposals to the child? Are you helping your child to verify the things on his or her own basis? So if we facilitate the child in this process, he lives with self-confidence. And it is very easy at this stage, because child is already looking for things. Child already wants to know what is right. You have to just facilitate it. So if we facilitate the child during this process, it becomes very easy for him to live with self-confidence or self-discipline. So we can see the whole process with this table simply. So at this left hand there is a age, right hand there is a process. So if you see, when the child is very young, he imitates and follows you through observing, doing, learning, understanding. This is the process. So he starts observing, he starts learning, understanding, copying you, imitating you. Then at the age of when he is young, he is adult, then he start understanding, learning, doing. He is more curious to know about the reality, etc. Similarly, when the child is young, youth, then we can facilitate all these things. We can facilitate him understanding the existence reality. We can improve his competence to live in relationship. We can impart skills for production, right utilization of the physical facility. We can make him aware about his consciousness. We can tell him about participation in family and society. All this we can facilitate the child at this age, at this state of his life. So we have to just facilitate the child. Child always looks for the right things because of his natural acceptance. So if we facilitate these process, the life of child becomes very easy, becomes very natural. Similarly, so we talked about what is the process, how the child learns the things from their parents, from the environment. So we talked about various states like imitating, following, obedience. And we saw that if we facilitate that child in the process of exploration, then he may become able to verify the things at his or her own natural acceptance. This facilitation makes the child life natural. So with this, we can also see what is the goal of education. How would we evaluate? So on completion of the process of this education, the person should achieve excellence. So if we facilitate the child in this process, what would be the outcome? The outcome would be in the form of excellence. Now the child would be living with excellence. So excellence means understanding all levels of living and being able to participate at every level. So excellence means to understand harmony and to live in harmony at all levels. So if a child is able to live in harmony as an individual, he is able to live in harmony in the family, he knows about his participation in the society, he knows interconnectedness, interrelatedness of the four orders, and he is practicing accordingly. It means the child has a feeling of excellence. And now the process is complete. Now child is living with the excellence. So this is a kind of evaluation. So if the child achieves this state, feeling of excellence, and he starts living with this, it means our process was correct. It means we become successful as a parents. As a parents, we are successful to impart the right process, to impart the right contents, to impart the right education in our child. And once the child is ready with this excellency, then he is able to participate in larger order. He is a natural agent of harmonious society. Now whatever he would think, rather it is related to skill, rather it is related to technology, in any field, he will fulfill the excellence. He will ensure the mutual complementarity with rest of the nature. He will ensure justice with human being. All these things would happen naturally if we facilitate the child in the process of exploration. Okay, friend. So let's see. Now we will discuss some important points which are required to keep in mind while providing education. So as a teacher, as a parents also. So number one, excellency in the teacher. So the important issue for the child during the process of learning and understanding is the feeling of relationship in the teacher for students. And whatever he is teaching, that is also seen in his behavior, in his conduct. So once the teacher lives according to values, then if the child see excellency, only if it is reflected in the behavior of the teacher. Only based on acceptance of excellence, the child may connect with the teacher, and then he becomes ready to understand. So it is necessary for the teacher that the teacher should strive for excellency. Whatever he is telling, he is living up to that mark. Then only child can inspire from the teacher. So number point 2, clarity. A teacher should have this clarity. As a parent, we should have this clarity that every child has a potential to understand. So it is very important point to be noted. There is a need to have the clarity that every child has a potential to understand. Every child can understand what is right. In that case, what would happen? If I know the child has innate potential to know, I do not get angry or irritated. In fact, every time, at every situation, we as a parents, as a teacher, try how we can do better for our child. So we can see that pace of learning can be different. So one can learn say 10 times faster than the other, but at one time every child learns and understands. So if I know about this innate potential of the child, in fact, I do not get irritated. I become complement in every situation with the child. And the next is Penel law. What is this? It is again an important point. It shows that the process of explaining and teaching with patience is important for learning and understanding, not the process of giving the penalty, punishment. If we explain things properly, keeping in mind that every child has innate potential to know, we try to arouse interest in the child, it is better transferred to the child. The punishment process appears to be an obstacle most of the time, rather than being a help to it. So because that punishment creates environment of fear, the child may lost his interest in this environment. So it is important to know that teaching can happen with the feeling of affection, with the feeling of guidance. So punishing is not a substitute for explaining and teaching. So the process of education becomes successful only when the child understands it properly and not just remembers it. Now with this we can impart technical education also. We can impart skills in the child also. So right understanding and right feeling, as we talked many times, is the need of every human being. So at least this right understanding and right feeling is to be achieved by every human being. And distribution of skills may vary. So a child may be enough competent in one skill but not in the other. So we have to observe that, and we can distribute skills accordingly. But it is important to note that every child wants this right understanding and right feeling. And with this we can talk about production. So primary production, secondary production and tertiary production. So there is a need of primary production. So if a student has skill, has right feeling and right understanding, then first there is a need to produce the things which are primarily required for everyone, like food, grains. These are primary production. Then secondary production, then tertiary production. Tertiary production like softwares, making softwares, etc. These are tertiary production. So if a child goes through this understanding, if a child has a skill, then he can also prioritize the production, which production is to be done priority level. So primary production that helps the nurturing and protection of the body is required at priority. So we will discuss all these productions, primary, secondary and tertiary, in coming slides in next lectures. So let's sum up the whole thing. So important source of learning of the child are the family, teaching institute, society, the environment. In the learning process, the child goes to various states like imitating, following, obedience, etc. The goal of education is to facilitate the process of development, developing those abilities in the individual which are essential for ensuring human society and order. And the child starts learning from the teacher if the child sees the excellency in the teacher. The teacher should have the clarity that every child has an innate potential to understand. So with this, we can help the child in the process of understanding. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Let's meet in the next lecture. Thank you very much.